Welcome to Useful Idiots, Thomas Chatterton Williams. I've been wanting to have you on for a while, but it's incredibly apropos this week. You're in the middle of this massive thing. Before we even get to what it is, did you ever think that it would turn into something on this scale?
No. As you know, something that I always think about is Junot Diaz 10 years ago or 15 years ago saying I'm not famous. Writers aren't famous, no one knows who Jonathan Franzen is when he walks down the street. But actually, there are a few writers who are actually really famous. And I think that the rest of us who are writers didn't fully appreciate what kind of fame someone like J.K. Rowling brings to signing her name on something. It's beyond anything that we experience. So, and then when you add a few others like Salman Rushdie, who's really famous, you add people like that into the mix. The letter, it went we were talking amongst ourselves, if we could have people's attention for 1 to 3 days, that would be a massive victory beyond what we could, hope for,
Right. So for listeners and people in the audience who don't know what we're talking about, this is about a group letter that was published in Harper's last
Tuesday.
And essentially it was a statement in favor of free speech. I mean, the term isn't in the letter, but it's been characterized as a statement against cancel culture. And almost immediately there was this massive response to it. And it had, as you mentioned, some very famous people signing. There were how many signatories? 153? 153
at first.
Yeah.
And now how many have dropped? How many?
I think we're at 151. I'm pretty sure we're just at 151,
So can you tell us what was the genesis of this idea? Because this was among, you were one of the people who put it together, basically.
Yeah. But I wasn't alone. It's something that, I was talking about this with George Packer, with Mark Lilla, with Robert Worth, and with David Greenberg. It's kind of an ongoing conversation that I've had with Mark and George for a long time. This idea that the realm of what's acceptable, or not even acceptable, because people always would say yeah, but racism used to be acceptable. That's not what we're talking about. It's the realm of what won't get you punished is constantly constricting. And the idea that Twitter kind of has an outsized influence now on not just our media and cultural institutions, but our corporate spaces and just all aspects of our life, that a mob can be whipped up and kind of decide that you must be made an example of. And the people that might be able to be a barrier between you and the mob oftentimes are capitulating to the mob because it's just too much inconvenience or trouble or something to figure out what's right or what's wrong, or to suss out what's the complexities of the situation. And so we've been talking about this for a while, and then, it felt like this spring, a lot of things had ratcheted up. And 5-6 weeks ago, we started thinking about an open letter and drafting some things. And then we were concerned that, is the timing, is it going to be really willfully misinterpreted as being some sort of reaction to the very real conversations that we're very happy to be having about the extraordinary brutality that comes out of American policing, for example. We don't want it to be seen like we're trying to be interfering with conversations that need to happen. But what we are talking about is things that seem to be not only inexplicable, but indefensible, like what happened to David Shore, which I'm sure you're aware of, These kind of overreaches, these overcorrections, when there are real wrongs, but then there are these overcorrections that make just a stifling atmosphere. And we felt, it's not a good time to do an open letter like this now because people will misconstrue it. But there's no good time to do an open letter like this now, so we have to do it at some point.
We did talk about the David Shore incident, but I thought it would be interesting to hear it just from your perspective,
Sure.
How it unfolded and how you heard about it. And we had Omar Wasow on, by the way, whose work, of course, was cited by Shore.
Whose work was the thing you're not supposed
precipitating.
Right.
Tweet. David Shore was a young data analyst at Civis. Am I pronouncing that right?
I think
so.
Analytics. Like a data company, and he simply retweeted without adding commentary research that Omar Wasow had done. Omar Wasow is an academic at Princeton University. This was research that was peer reviewed and was not considered beyond the pale by any means. It was research about the efficacy of violent or nonviolent protesting in an election year, looking back at what happened during the era of President Nixon. And for retweeting this research, he was I hate this term, but he was canceled. He lost his job. And it's really chilling because the idea behind his cancellation was that it wasn't what he said. It was that there were implications about the research that were not welcome at this time, whether they were correct or not correct. And that's what I think a lot of us really took that. We tried not to name specific incidents as the reason for the letter, but everything that we allude to in the culture, we have at least 2 or 3 incidents that fit, and we give like 5 examples of the way the discourse is constricting, and we have like 2 or 3 examples that fit each description. But this was something that was very much on my mind, and I think on some of the others' minds as we were putting together our rationale.
I think that there's some issues, not cancelable issues, but I think like the framing of violent versus nonviolent, and Matt and I have kind of debated this, is something that can be questioned or renegotiated. But I certainly don't think that Wassow should be canceled, nor do I think someone should be canceled for tweeting his research. And I think what you're saying is exactly true. It's like people saw that as he was accused of anti-blackness, of anti-black racism, and kicked off of a
David Shore
was, yeah. But so I think people saw this as a way to blame protesters, to discourage certain types of protests, to chide, shame, whatever. And I think you can argue that. I mean, I don't know how much I would agree with you. I think you certainly can argue that something can have an effect that's not necessarily its desired intention. All of that is fair game. But that this guy was just fired, I think is scary. And I just want to be candid that as a kind of leftist and as a white woman, I feel, and now I feel like I'm being like a woe's me reactionary, but I feel like I can't talk about that case unless, and I do think it's important, but I have to ground it in the fact that, because he is a white man, David Shore, and this is kind of embarrassing that I have to say this.
You have to talk right now.
I have to, and so I have to say, Stephen Salaita was fired and lost his job and shouldn't have been. And Joseph...
As a preamble.
Yeah, and Joseph Massad was, persecuted for his views and shouldn't have been. And the biggest disenfranchisement and cancellation and firing of people happens to critics of Israel and I'm also Jewish, so I should throw that in there.
Yeah, this is becoming this is epic.
Critics of Israel.
This is your preamble.
Yeah, this is mine. Yeah, and I'm just being and it's no, I think we can hold 2 ideas in our heads. We can walk and chew gum at the same time and acknowledge that this guy lost his job because of this. And some people are kind of squishy about this and say we don't know what happened, but it's pretty clear that he did. Right. And that there are other examples that don't get attention, that should get attention. And it is a principle. And I just think it's very frustrating to me how some people, I think some leftists think they're owning the libs from the left by dismissing any firing or any repercussions that are faced by people who aren't the most marginalized, or whose story isn't the most egregious. And I just think that whittles away and undermines the principle. And so, it is frustrating. Well,
could we just define what is canceling from your point of view, right? So, in other words, all the things that Katie talked about, does it have to be a threat to your job?
Right.
Does it have to be, what is it exactly?
So I think what canceling really is, there's a lot of talk about, this is just, the cancel culture has always been with us. Julius Caesar was canceled by Brutus, and
well, he was. That's true.
Yes, human beings have always done certain things, but cancel culture is very specific. Cancel culture has to do with a lot of people being whipped up or whipping themselves up to come after a specific target, and not to disagree with them, to call them names, to be mean to them, but specifically to target that target's employer and to demand that person be driven from the realm of acceptable discourse. And not just that person's employer, but that no one else shall be contaminated with that person either. So it's not just to get somebody from the New York Times, if you're trying to cancel Barry Weiss, it's that actually she should not be somebody that can be writing or editing. She's beyond the realm of acceptability. It's to stigmatize somebody, which is what's really, really, it's not to hold someone accountable and then to try to bring them back into the proper discourse. It's to stigmatize them so that they are banished from the realm. And it's to do it with employment specifically. So in the most absurd way this week on Twitter, I was talking about Barry Weiss, and I mentioned just absurdly that a guy was really rude about her. Friend of a friend who was a guest in my home was really rude about her, and I tried to engage him in a serious way on the subject, and it was extraordinarily ad hominem and kind of just impolite. And so at some point he ended up leaving. I tweeted about it, which is stupid. It's the way that Twitter incentivizes us to break down the line between public and private. I'm still dealing with the ramifications of that in my own household. But
yeah, that one's still smoldering a little bit as we speak. Yeah.
But that's not cancel culture. That is not me infringing on his free speech. That is nothing like what we were talking about in the open letter. What we're talking about in the open letter is that I would then target that man's employers. I would then try to make it so that no one else would engage him. I would try to stigmatize him, and I would try to whip up as much support as I possibly could for everybody else to gang up on him. That's what's so kind of terrifying about what Twitter and other forms of social media, the tools that those social media give us to really do things that are ancient impulses in us, that are going back to, I think a lot about Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, where, the townspeople come together once a year to stone one person. That's what it really can feel like when you're observing how certain people are fair game for things that people don't think is appropriate for any number of other people for a variety of reasons.
I think that, I guess I have a question for you, because it seems like there's employment-based cancel culture, and then you described it as kind of making someone stigmatizing, and making them toxic. And I think that there's this dual narrative of cancel culture doesn't exist, but if it were to exist, it's good.
Right, exactly.
And I know that cancel culture exists, or something. I don't know if we should call it that. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's like guilt by association or toxifying people or something. But like, I've had people who I want to invite on my show who I haven't. And not because their ideas are bad, but just because I don't want to be associated with them. And I've said this before on Twitter, like I have a visceral feeling when it happens. Like I can tell when I'm like being like, when it's a peer pressure thing and I'm like thinking with that part of my brain. I don't know what part of my brain the brain is. And it's like a gross feeling, and I try to like check it and then, invite the person on. But I think that's like, is that another form of it? Is that like another end of the spectrum? Is that a totally different thing? I also actually do think, though, it can't totally be separated, because just an example, we've had someone on this show who provoked a big backlash, and people were writing to Rolling Stone to have our show canceled, literally like off the, done, not metaphorically canceled.
Real cancellation.
Real cancel. And if that had been successful, that would have been an employment issue, right? Right. So I don't know where the line is.
You're talking about something that's very important, which is the point of cancel culture, which is the self-censorship that you don't need to be told. That's why cancel culture is not actually about one criticism of our letter was like, you have big, huge names like Malcolm Gladwell in there. Malcolm Gladwell can't be canceled. That's true. That's true.
That's actually the point of the letter, isn't it?
That's the point of the letter. He's actually sticking his neck out or doing something that's generous on behalf of people that can be canceled. Margaret Atwood, lots of people are beyond the point where you can mess up their livelihoods.
Right.
But what cancel culture is very effective at is like taking someone like David Shore or somebody like that. I'm still cancelable. You maybe not Matt, I don't know, but maybe Substack is where you got to go. But if you're employed or if you rely on, anything other than your own self for your income, you can be canceled and you're in trouble. And what it does is it makes examples out of certain people so that everybody watching now knows that you're not going near, not just that person, but that type of behavior. And so it constricts how you can behave, and it's very, very effective. It's so effective that even if I'm being completely honest, there were people that I would have loved to include on the letter who I knew that I couldn't, because it would have sunk the letter, even though I don't believe it should have.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? And this was a
Absolutely.
letter about being brave and standing up to.
Right.
Even though
And
we
it
don't
already.
use,
Sorry.
we don't use the term because the right has cynically manipulated the term, and Trump has taken advantage of the term and kind of used it as a taunt. But the idea of cancellation is so real that this letter couldn't include people that I think it should have included.
So one of the criticisms of the letter was, oh, this doesn't happen that often. There's a million more important things to be worried about right now. Read the room. That was there. A lot of people were saying that.
Right.
But isn't what you're talking about the issue? It actually affects an enormous number of people, and it only takes a relatively small number of examples at any institution for it to become a very serious problem, right? Or is there another way to look at it?
Right. You don't need many people for it to influence the behavior of tens and hundreds of thousands of onlookers. People have social media platforms with hundreds of thousands of followers. One person gets made an example of, so many people are watching. You multiply that out. So, I mean, the effects are extraordinarily chilling to me. It's hard to overstate this. Of course, like, if we were only going to talk about the most serious threats, of course, it's an insane argument. We would only talk about climate change or something. If we were only going to talk about if you can only talk about the superlative of threats facing you. But this is very real, and like everybody else involved with the letter, as Noam Chomsky even said in an email that was shared on Twitter in the past few days, we all have inboxes flooded with emails and messages from people, and I have Instagram messages. On every platform I'm on, I can't even read them all. I have so many messages from people who are not famous, as well as from some people that are famous who don't feel they can talk, saying, thank you for doing that. If it moves like the needle a little bit, you've done a great service, because like in my law firm, I'm not in the media, I'm not a known person, but in my law firm, I can't even say what I really think.
What do you say to the criticism? And this is something Katie and I talked about. There are people who signed the letter who have kind of engaged in some of this behavior sort of in their own pasts. You retweeted a couple of articles that made that point as well. I thought very fairly, in the spirit of like trying to debate. Yeah, exactly. But what's the response to that? I think there are probably a couple of things you could say, but I'd be interested to hear.
Well, there are a couple.
You have to let him know what's allowed, what's acceptable speech for him to respond with.
First of all,
this is a safe space. So yeah.
First of all, like, when did you say the thing that you're being held accountable for now? If it's something that you said in college and you're in your mid to late 30s, I'm not sure that I really want to get into a conversation about what people did or didn't do in college. I want to talk about what people do in their professional capacities and the way that they come to be public figures or whatever. So that's the first thing. So I don't care that Ibram Kendi wrote an op-ed saying that white people might be aliens. I don't care any of that. I wore velour sweatpants in college. I don't want anybody holding that.
Did you really?
No, I think that's a plus. I think you just your stock just rose. But
like, also I want to say that some of the people that might be accused of canceling people on this letter, two things to that, if they've been doing it in recent history and in their professional capacity. One is that we wanted to make a statement that defines a set of principles and values that anybody can sign, and it's the statement that matters, not the biography of every signatory. Second of all, we wanted to have an enormous enough ideological kind of spectrum of people signing on to these values that matter, which I think we did get, that it would be impossible to kind of like familiarize yourself with every single position that every single signatory took and then insulate yourself from any possible criticism that could come your way there. What we wanted to do was that's why I'm not the author of this. George Packer's not the author of this. Some of us started it, and then we sent it out to get signatories. And some of these signatories are really smart people, and some of the people that declined to sign it are really smart people. A lot of these people gave feedback, and we're smart enough to have incorporated their feedback because it made sense. And so over 20 people contributed language to this thing. So this is a document that should really matter on its own outside of who says it matters, if that makes, a bit of sense.
Well, I just thought the response on that front was really interesting because it spoke to how these two groups of these two directions of thought are sometimes speaking past each other, right? Because you were very focused, it seemed to me, on the statement. You thought that the number of signatories would focus attention on what the statement said, but this other style of thought that's now becoming very prevalent is focused on basically good people and bad people. Let's make categories of people who are like worthy and worthy, persons and unpersons. And it was suddenly, the letter became all about who signed it. Like almost instantaneously, it became about that. And
because of a few signatories in particular, out of 153, I would say there were a maximum 5, but there's probably more like 3 that made it that way.
But those 2 points of view are pretty irreconcilable, aren't they? I mean, like if one is sort of asking us like we should only really be worried about what the statement says, and in fact, probably most of the people who signed don't care at all who else signed it. But there's another point of view that thinks that that's extremely important. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you talk to people who have that point of view?
It's a big difference in the value system. I think these are conflicting visions of what the work we're doing really is about. So Malcolm Gladwell tweeted in response to Jennifer Finney Boylan. Both of them are signatories. Jennifer Finney Boylan's position was that as a trans woman, had she known that Rowling and Jesse Singal had signed the letter, she would not have signed because she thought it was all good people. And Malcolm Gladwell engaged her on that on Twitter and said, that's precisely why I signed, because these are values I believe in, and I knew that there would be many people I don't agree with who would also support these values, and that's important. This is a very serious disagreement on how to see intellectual debate, on how to see how to be a public intellectual, how to defend ideas. I come from a background where there are good and bad ideas, and ideas pass through people, and people are kind of always in flux and capable of change, as opposed to their fixed natures and good and bad people. I don't think that view is on the up and up in the past. It's changed quite a bit in the 10 years that I've been working. I've only been in this space since 2010 professionally. And I would say there's an enormous difference where we are now than when I started on whether there's good and bad people or good and bad ideas.
Yeah, just to follow up on that really quickly, isn't there's a thing also in how we regulate speech that's completely different and very much focused on that change. So in the old days, we had a system that punished libel and slander and other forms of prohibited speech, but the target was the speech, not the person. The victim was remunerated. There wasn't any effort to permanently remove the person from the discourse. Now the kind of new idea is, okay, this is a bad person. We're just going to take that person off the platform, and it's not the speech. It's the speaker that's really the issue. I mean, isn't that kind of the same thing you're talking about?
It's very much so, and I wonder what you think about this. Actually, I'd love to know. Is that because of the extraordinary pressure on the generations coming up for anything like job security, on the kind of constriction of these are highly coveted jobs and platforms, and as Hannah Arendt had pointed out, a purge is the best thing for young people who are interested in moving up. It's just a fact.
I mean, there's probably, that's overtly part of the argument in some of these cases, right? Like we saw what was that, a New York Times article about the white gatekeeper in the food industry, right? I mean, essentially they were saying is, it's time for more new people to occupy these positions. And so, I mean, is that part of it? I don't know. That's an interesting question.
I mean, I think that the labor pressure is, without people necessarily consciously thinking this way, the labor pressure is driving the kind of, in a time of plenty, I don't think that there would be so much need to not just hold people accountable and reform them, but to actually banish them so that spaces open up.
That's interesting.
This is really like something that I'm profoundly convinced is part of the dynamic at play. In a constricting media landscape, these are highly sought after positions.
Wanted to ask if there is, if you wanted to share the names of the people you felt like would sink the letter, now that it's already been, it's already for some people been sunk.
Or categorize.
Oh, yeah, sure. You could do that. And anything you would add or take away from the letter. Like either, if this is a really to be like, let's take the, behind the curtain. Like whether you think like actually legit you wish you had put in, or taken out because it would have made the letter better, and anything that you're like, that was not worth the controversy. So like the public and then the private.
Yeah, these are good questions, and they're tough questions, and I'm going to try to answer them honestly with the caveat that I just think that with all that we've discussed among ourselves, I can't probably mention internal conversations about who we couldn't ask to be on. We made tremendous oversights, and a lot of them were accidental because it wasn't scientific, and also we were trying to get people's contact information at the same time that we were trying to get the thing done and get it out in the world. And 150 just was an arbitrary cap that we put, that we had enough people. I really wanted to have Matt on. In retrospect, I just didn't have his email, and it was an oversight by me. In retrospect, I would have liked to have reached out to Sarah Zhang at the New York Times, because it's not ideological. We start from the premise that the most canceled man in America, you could make the case, was Colin Kaepernick, and that the chancellor in chief is Donald Trump. This is not just a left thing. It's certainly cancel culture on the right is real.
Absolutely.
So I wish we would have reached out to Sarah Zhang, who tweeted about it and made it seem like that was there was some well thought out reason why she wasn't reached. It was just no one knows her. No one that we reached out to knew her. We didn't have her email. I think I should have included Brett Weinstein. I think I should have included Sam Harris. There's a variety of reasons why that didn't happen. None are nefarious. Just the idea was that we need to get a lot of people together, and we need to make a document that affirms basic principles that everybody can get on. And some people, after it came out, said that they wish they would have seen all of the signatories, and if they knew J.K. Rowling in particular was on there, they wouldn't have signed. But no one ever asked to see all the signatories, and it never occurred to us, as 5 different people who are emailing a bunch of different people, that we should offer to show everybody, because we didn't even land J.K. Rowling until 24 hours before the thing was over. So anyway, we weren't going to email and just keep harassing Salman Rushdie every time we got a new signatory, Right. But in retrospect, would I take her off, considering the amount of grief that particular issue has caused people that never work or deal with that issue? And I don't want to get criticism for saying that we never work and deal with that issue, because people would say, and why don't you work and deal with that issue? It's not because we don't care about it. It's because I really believe, Stanley Crouch told me when I was just starting out, that there's only a limit of issues that you can really seriously engage in the public arena with anything like authority. And anyway, that's not my issue. But I wouldn't take her off of. I wouldn't take. Yeah, I mean, trans issues, and I'm here trying to defend free speech, and I'm terrified. I'm terrified.
Called the turf.
Yeah, I'm terrified of the whole thing. We're working in a climate of fear, and I'm not even afraid so much as I'm also just aware of how cynically the game is played. But I'm certainly no transphobe, so I will say that. But I also wouldn't kick her off of the list, because as far as I can tell, she is somebody who upholds the values that we believe in. And she is also an issue, or she's engaged in an issue where, if she is wrong, seriously rational and well-articulated debate, exposing how she's wrong to the light of better ideas, would be beneficial for our society in a way that just saying that she's an epithet can never be,
Yeah, I think that one of the differences I have with a lot of people with whom I agree on politics is that, and I had Matt Karp on, signatory Matt Karp, historian, fellow Bernie bro, socialist, Jacobin.
It was a big deal for us to have him sign. That meant a lot.
So, and he and I were having a discussion about this, and like, I think that we should not cancel, and I don't want to say call out, but I think the most problematic, oh my God, I can't believe I said that word. The most interesting signatory for me is probably Carrie Nelson, because I think that his treatment of Salaida was pretty bad, pretty cancelly. I also think we can get into this because let's talk about the Barry Weiss thing later, because it'll just dominate this whole part of the discussion the way I don't want it to.
You'll have to explain to me why she in particular.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll do that now. It's not so, and I actually agree with what you said about the ad hominem, and there is a groupthink and there's a laziness, and like just saying Barry Weiss is insert ad hominem is stupid, and I think that there are real things that she needs to be asked about. I see this letter though as like for me and for Matt Karp, we were debating Ali Abu Nima on this. And for me and him, to a certain extent, we see this as a possibility to highlight the hypocrisy. Like we do. Doesn't mean we don't believe the principles of the letter. I think it's totally fair to support the principles. I think Freddie DeBoer had a really good piece on this, by the way, where he's like, what could you possibly object to? And then also the counter argument is that there's a context, and sure, that's all true. But I think that like it's not canceling Carrie Nelson to ask how he can reconcile the free exchange of ideas and open debate with what he did with Stephen Salaida, which was condemned even by the AAUP, which I don't remember what that stands for, academic something. I think that's really important, like something that could be asked and should be asked. And I think this has the potential of clarifying some of that stuff. I mean, I don't think that that he's going to say something. I'm be like, oh, that makes sense. I think it has the potential of shedding light on some major oversights. And I think that...
So are you asking him to clarify the
No, sorry. My point was actually, maybe I will. My point was that I don't see this as that to me doesn't taint the letter per se. I think we can say, and this is how I feel with free speech stuff, like that's not the realm. I'm not going to let that be the realm of people I disagree with. Like I'm not going to reject free speech because some people I don't like are either believe in it or in some cases I would say are weaponizing it. But there's a tendency on the left that I don't like, which is just the like free speech is like liberal and bourgeois and it's just not true as a principle, but even the effects, like the most censored people by Facebook, YouTube, Twitter are Palestinians who literally have their Facebooks deactivated. And so I think it's just short-sighted and stupid for the left to dismiss these things as the realm of, liberal privilege. It's really stupid. In principle and in outcome.
It can't be the realm of liberal privilege because we have people on that list who don't partake in bourgeois liberal privilege. We have refugees on the list. We have Kian, I'm going to butcher his last name and I don't want to, Tashbek at Columbia University, who spent years in an Iranian prison. We have Reginald Dwayne Betts, who's one of my favorite writers, who did 8 years in an adult prison from the age of 16 for a carjacking, and who then went to Yale Law School and basically said that he signed because he doesn't believe that we should be fostering more unforgiving environments or that people should be marked by stigma. And I think he makes an argument that is so powerful that people don't know what to do with it. So they just focus on Barry Weiss or something like that, or Jesse Singal, because how are they going to counter him? We have at least 2 signatories that have lived for significant amounts of time with fatwas on their heads. Kamel Daoud, one of my favorite novelists in the French language, lives currently in Oran, Algeria, with a fatwa right now. He was one of our first signatories, and nobody has even addressed his presence on the list. He's far from a pampered bourgeois white man. Salman Rushdie certainly gave a decade of his life to living under protection in a fatwa. People really haven't known what to do about him either, other than to say he's famous. So I think that the kind of criticism has been really disingenuous when you look at the thoroughness with which we put together that list.
Well, I mean, doesn't that reaction a little bit reinforce your hypothesis about all this? Because it's such a thing on social media to create this. I mean, Katie and I have talked about this before, but this like ick factor around names, right? Like you don't even want to be in the same tweet with a person who has this certain name, right? Or they'll throw it at you. They'll say, "Oh, you're such a Michael Tracy," right? And as a result, it's like a disciplinary mechanism that's like become very ingrained with a whole generation of people now who follow the media in particular. And I felt like that was a lot of what happened with this letter. Is there was a lot of throwing of icky names around that was used to cloud the actual issue at hand. I don't know. I just wondered if you.
That was true, but like on the first day, there was also just like people not really like thinking through why some people would believe in these principles. So Noam Chomsky was trending the first day that the letter was out, like number 4 in the United States, because basically people were saying that they were so surprised and disappointed that he could sign.
Which I found amazing.
They clearly don't know his work. I mean,
right? You know what I'm saying?
You can hate him or love him, but that is so
he
on brand.
He stands by this principle. Yeah. Why would that surprise you?
Yeah.
You know? But they were thinking that so many other people should be icky, as Matt was saying, that he would steer clear. But that's what actually principle looks like. You know, in France, Noam Chomsky is kind of a controversial figure because he wrote the foreword to a book of a Holocaust denial.
Well, he didn't write the forward. He wrote a letter or an article, and then that guy took that and made it the forward. Yeah, which is different.
But he did stand up for somebody.
He did. Right. That's what he was standing up for. Yeah, and then he turned it into the forward. I wonder if he would have. It's interesting. We should have Noam on again. We should ask him if that guy had asked it to be the forward. I wonder what he would say.
I would wonder what he would say too. But clearly, he has a kind of principle that he puts above. He puts it above the kind of collective that he's supposed to associate his name with, which I think is something that we would all be a little bit better if we had more like Noam Chomsky in us than kind of like reading the room in us, you know?
Right. I mean, I that's to me my first associations with Noam Chomsky were this is a person who's not afraid to, you know, stand on the same platform as someone with whom he completely disagrees basically about everything over some other principle, right? And yet that's not the way people expected him to behave in a different way because
they forgot.
Right, they've forgotten what the ideology is, right?
Or they're so used to people like covering their asses because of this thing that they probably expected that they're surprised when someone doesn't do that. I mean, I think that if you want to disagree with Chomsky on the content of the principle, that's go ahead. But I think that like the just smearing him, like also go whatever yourself if you're like disappointed in Chomsky. Like, who the hell are you? Who, what, like, judge, who gave you these powers of judgment? Like, I want to know where this random, like, oh, Chomsky disappointed you? I'm sure he's devastated. But I guess I do, another related thing is, so there's the ick factor. I think they're like, I didn't think of this before, but now that we're talking, there are like a couple of different ways that people, I think, like, avoid the content, which is there's the ick factor, there's the identity-based factor, which is that,
well, that was fascinating in this case. Like, oh, it's a bunch of white dudes, and then you look at the picture, and it's like Wynton Marsalis. It's like
Milton Jones, you know, Orlando Patterson, Greg Pablo.
The New York Times, right, had an image. I can't remember. I know Gloria Steinem was in it.
Billy Jones, Wayne Betts,
and it's like literally someone tweeted like, look at, like, this letter was signed by a bunch of straight white men, and Glenn Greenwald like retweeted that and said that this is like the exact invisibilizing that we saw of Bernie bros of color and women and LGBTQ people that we saw. Did you consider asking him on? I don't know if that's too like private.
Bernie Sanders?
No, sorry. No. That would have been amazing. Yeah, I know.
That would have been amazing.
Glenn Greenwald.
We did. I would have had him on. Interestingly enough, he's become someone in the past few months that I've interacted with quite a bit on Twitter, and it's been cool. We really, But like, I was outvoted on that one.
Interesting. You see, this is interesting because I assume some of the reasons that you were outvoted on that was because of some of his things that were considered beyond the pale. And I'm not like, it's just not a gotcha.
No, I don't actually even remember. There were certain names that some people, there were just certain names that anybody wanted. And then it was like that, like the rest of the people didn't just know. And I don't even remember who it was. Sincerely, I don't remember, and I don't remember what the thing was. But someone like Glenn Greenwald, he has a huge name and a huge reputation, and someone disagrees with him the way that someone disagrees with a lot of people that have been in the game at a high profile for a long enough time.
But doesn't that suggest that? I mean,
that it suggests that like it's not cancellation. So the thing that I want to specify is like we have a lot of friends, each of us, who were like, why wasn't I on? Are you crazy? Like I'm a poster boy for cancellation, or like these are values that I've fought for forever. And like something that, Mark Lilla always said that really became kind of like the guiding ethos was like, you might even be better on this issue than us. This is not a prize. This is not a prize. And it's not like our idea of who is the best on this issue or who is anything other than this is trying to be an effective piece of rhetoric, for better or worse. And so you're trying to build a coalition of people that can both champion and like reflect like diversity and kind of like all hold the thing together. And so it's a really complicated, and it's an unscientific kind of evolving process. And so some people are excluded. And like in retrospect, I think all of us, like, had we understood the kind of scrutiny that would go into the list, wouldn't like, these are decisions that happened in like, a conversation, and then we didn't necessarily always revisit. And then the thing like kept going. And so I think in retrospect, maybe that person would have been like, you know what, Glenn Greenwald should be on there, because I don't think it was like, he's cancelable. I think it was like, maybe somebody else would drop off the list who we need to get this other person. That's what I'm really talking about. You know what I'm saying?
So there is the which is interesting.
There is this dynamic, which I'll be very honest. One person said, so there's like canceled and then there's canceled. I can take it. Like this person was on, but I can't be on. And that kind of really hurt me and bothered me. But it also, there is some like element of like, truth to that like kind of argument. There were some people that the thing would fall apart with, and we wouldn't even get a hearing. So then you say, what is the ultimate purpose, and what is our allegiance? What is our ultimate allegiance to? And it's to do we believe in these values that we want as many people as possible to engage, or do we just want to like, make sure that we get every name that we possibly can think of? And so there's a kind of imperfect alchemy to the thing that satisfies no one, except I would emphasize that the people that it does satisfy, that make us feel like we have done something worthwhile, is all of the hundreds, and I would say at this point thousands of people that have written us that we never even knew about, who said that we captured something that they're dealing with and that the letter helped them. You know what I mean? So that's the last question I want to ask about is the impact of this, right? So how do you think ultimately this worked or didn't work? Because it feels to me from the outside that for all the hostile reaction that you got, and you got a ton, you have created a space to have a discussion about this that maybe didn't exist before, right? Which was the purpose of it, right? Right. That was the purpose, more than it was awarding anybody for their work in defense of free speech or anything like that. It was supposed to be that no individual matters so much as getting the conversation going. And like to that end, this has been translated and published in Le Monde in France, in Die Zeit in Germany, in La Repubblica in Italy, in a paper I can't say the name of in Japan, in the leading daily in the Netherlands, in El País in Spain, in La Reforma in Mexico. I have interview requests in Chile. Le Monde has done multiple articles on it. I mean, it was published in Finland, a friend told me, in Helsinki. This has sparked something that is actually like an international conversation in a serious way in multiple important societies where these issues, I mean, there have been 5 op-eds in The Guardian or something about it in the UK. All the conversation in America. This is to the good, I think. Much more than me being associated with it or anybody not being associated with it. Like that was what we were trying to do, is to get these things on the table. If you think about how hard it is to get a story like that going in 10 different countries for over a week, Kanye West just announced that he was running for president, and within like half of a Twitter day, that was over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because
you know what I mean? He just announced he's no longer running, and no one's even really talking about it. You know, like this is week 2 of a serious conversation about what I think is like a defining aspect of our culture right now. So I think that none of us would say that there were not mistakes made in the publishing process. They're not things we regret. People we regret excluding, but that like the thing actually accomplished what we had hoped to accomplish better than we had even believed was possible.
There's no question, and I found this too. Just sort of writing a couple of things about the subject. There's an enormous global interest in this that you've probably unleashed through this letter, right? And even though it's been something that the right has talked about forever, there's a new way to talk about this now in places where it was kind of just something that was only talked about after work between colleagues as much, right? So
right.
You must feel good about that at least. Right?
Yeah, totally. Oh, everyone's like, oh, this is what I've been talking about in my private texts or group chats. And it's like now people are talking about it like openly, and we're trying to figure out, yeah, we always probably have had things that are beyond the pale or that cross a line. And we're collectively trying to figure out where our lines are now and to try to make whatever we're doing to enforce quickly developing norms on the fly. We're trying to make it more and more fair. And so I think that I've taken an enormous amount of abuse. Some people have felt disrespected or maybe that's too strong, but have felt slighted for not being included. Like lots of us have had negative experiences in the past week or more with this letter, but ultimately those individual negative experiences pale in comparison to what I think has been collectively healthy.
I do wonder your thoughts on Kerry Nelson and if he should be asked about his actions, because that wasn't in college, that was recent, and he used his professional heft. And then Bari Weiss, for me, the issue isn't what she did so much in college, but and Glenn Greenwald has written about this, but I don't think and I do think that people are sloppy and lazy when they critique her, but I do think there are concrete things, and I think that the issue is that I don't think was totally straightforward or honest about what she had done in terms of I think she tried to brush it under the rug as as pro-free speech, but there really was, I think, a targeting of certain professors, including Massad. Do you think that it's fair game to raise the things about Kerry Nelson and Bari Weiss in a way that's not ad hominem?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think that I don't know Kerry Nelson. I know Anne-Marie Slaughter a little bit, and I know Bari Weiss pretty well. And I know that Anne-Marie, and especially Bari, I can say for sure, would not think that they're beyond being critiqued or that they couldn't be challenged or that people couldn't, in a good faith way, disagree with decisions that they made or arguments that they made. But I think that the kind of specific hostility, I don't know Kerry Nelson, that wasn't somebody that I was aware of prior to the list. The specific hostility that comes to Bari is beyond disagreeing with positions she's taken, even if those positions were wrong and could be effectively argued to be wrong. I don't know what it is about her. She was trending #1 in the entire country yesterday on Twitter. If you think about that, why? Like how is that possible? What has she ever done that justifies that level of investment in kind of a schadenfreude or like a cheering for her unhappiness or comeuppance? It's very strange. And Anne-Marie Slaughter has taken a bit of abuse too, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's something that women face that I'm not aware of. There's a kind of hostility that certain women get. Maybe you'd push back on that. I don't know. But I do know that there's a kind of deeply troubling kind of visceral nastiness that gets attached to certain names. I don't know Kerry Nelson at all.
Yeah. Well, he's a straight white man, so we can isolate the criticism of him as
he deserves
as deserved. Yeah, I would say. I think that I don't know. A lot of people, I think, were. I have a problem. This isn't cancellation worthy. I think I do, and this is kind of awkward to say, I do think that she was not fully honest about what she did at Columbia. And again, it's one thing to say she was in college, but I don't think she's been clear on what she did. I, as a Jew, am bothered by her statement that Jews who support BDS are like Jews who reverse their circumcision surgery.
Yeah, but I just want to be clear. That's not a view that I share.
No, I know.
Our friendship is not. Friendship with her is not conditional that you even have the same views on Israel or BDS or any of that. That's not how she.
You didn't. Are you sure you didn't meet at a BDS is a lot like circumcision reversal surgery meeting?
And Katie, when you go out in the morning and you think to yourself, I enjoy all the items on the Bill of Rights. Does it bother you that other people in the country also enjoy those rights? I mean, I think that's kind of the way that I live. It's a simple declaration of what people are agreeing to endorse, and I don't know. To me, like, it's totally irrelevant who else signs the document that I sign.
I think it's a fair thing to look at, especially because as you said, there were some decisions, and certain people were added, certain people were not added.
So I'll be honest, that was somebody that had to be like, what are the ramifications of them being on the list? And the thinking was that she kind of embodies the kind of abuse she embodies being somebody that I think has been harassed, bullied, targeted for cancellation in a way that is exactly indicative of the cultural tendencies of the social media era that we're pushing back against and saying are antithetical to the kind of civil society that we'd like to be in. J.K. Rowling, Barry Weiss, these are people that are like lightning rods for extraordinary abuse. And so I think that they need to be on the letter, regardless of whether somebody might make serious critiques about previous positions that they've taken. They uphold these values. They really do uphold these values and argue for them, and they might have contradictions, but like establish those contradictions. But these are people that exemplify the cultural conversation that we're trying to engage in a huge way. I seriously can't wrap my mind around why Barry leaving the New York Times was #1 on Twitter yesterday in all of America during a global pandemic. It's nuts if you even stop to think about it.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask about. So I remember Kurt Vonnegut once talked about how somebody negatively reviewed some novel, and he was saying he was amazed at the hostility of it. It was like watching somebody put on a suit of armor to attack a hot fudge sundae, right? Like where the hostility that comes out over things that, in the scheme of things are not so huge. Like, what does that come from? People being freaked out about being inside because of the pandemic? Is it like economic stress, or is it
weren't some people lamenting her firing? Like, I'm not.
Not
everyone was. Yeah, and the
she
point
wasn't
of your
fired.
letter.
She wasn't fired.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Well, lamenting herself, her resignation. Yeah.
Right. No, and I got caught up in it with the self-expelling phrase. Right. But she resigned. But I thought she wrote an extremely powerful resignation letter that was probably part of the reason why she was trending so high yesterday, because she made points that I think people have to take seriously.
I was just going to say, she did recently, this is fair game. We're talking about civility and discourse, and politicians are different, but she did say that Tulsi Gabbard was an Assadist toady, and then Joe Rogan was like, what do you mean? What does that mean? And she didn't know how to define toady, and she couldn't. And then he asked her
that she was nervous, and she flubbed.
Okay, but she didn't. But she didn't have any evidence of. I think if you're going to call someone an Assadist toady, forget the definition of the word. Okay, I do think that it's on. I think it's like it's not civil discourse or debate to call someone that, especially if you don't have like the receipts. I think that, that is a toxic, that is creating the kind of intolerance and toxic, you're labeled like a supporter for Assad because of your foreign policy decisions and your stance on that. I just think it's like a little bit, I think, wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Like she can dish it out, but she doesn't want to take it. No,
lots of people do think that. Well, when we're actually talking about, without getting bogged down, what we're really talking about is like we need to have a conversation about where we find these behaviors. Just like I think that most people agree that like Tucker Carlson's lead writer was revealed to have done some things that were beyond the pale, and so that's not actually like a disproportionate punishment whipped up by a senseless mob for him to lose his job at the #1 rated cable news show in the history of television when he has an alternate persona that's a racist. And I think what Nick Cannon said also is something that most people don't have a problem with him facing repercussions for. But then we have all these other cases where we're trying to figure out, did they get to that line or did they stay clear of it? And we need to have like a real conversation about how we deal with, how we draw these lines and how we come to a consensus on what is and what isn't beyond the pale.
I would also argue, I think part of the idea of the letter was to invite people to examine what is it that makes us so filled with rage at people we disagree with that we can't talk about this stuff. And so when we have one of these letters, and look, I was one of the people that criticized people like Barry Weiss for going after Tulsi Gabbard. I was one of the only people actually who defended Tulsi in print. But I do think that but that person sucks, is part of what is getting in the way, having a more realistic and like productive atmosphere for both academia and the media and basically the whole intellectual world. Isn't that sort of the idea? I don't know. I'm wondering.
That's absolutely the idea, because I start from the premise that she doesn't suck. So like, let's have a conversation about the issues and where she might be wrong, and you might be able to like convey to me why this principle that I believe in would be would be contradicted by something that she's done. And then, I'm sure that like she'd be open to that kind of participation in a good faith conversation too. What derails everything is this idea that like we were talking about earlier, where there are good and bad people and not good and bad ideas or better and worse ideas. And so of course that makes anybody feel defensive. And then I think when you add into it a kind of like what seems to amount to a kind of like extreme bullying, then you're going to get somebody that certainly feels that they would like to uphold like these basic principles because that society is fairer for everybody, and they feel they're being treated unfairly. And so then I don't see her contribution to the list as anything contradictory. She's hoping for a society where people don't experience the kind of extraordinary bullying and harassment that she knows what it feels like straight up. Anybody who wants to be in the business of arguing ideas has to put up with pushback. And like, if you're an honest broker, I try to always like some of the best criticism I've ever gotten has changed my mind. I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, you got a lot of craziness in the last couple of weeks. What was the quote that something about being deeply invested in respectability politics? I can't remember exactly what it was, but that's
the counter letter, man. The counter letter signed by, I think, 160, mostly journalists of color, responding with, it was called a more specific letter on justice and open debate. In the opening graph or so, it said that like Thomas Chatterton Williams is a Black man who believes that racism exists but can be transcended on the personal level. Can be transcended, especially on the personal level. And it was presented as like some damning indictment of how I'm just like beyond redemption and like, an opponent of racial justice, where I wrote that as, and most people I've ever interacted with who have read it as me saying, racism is a problem. Anti-Black racism is real, especially where it intersects with class. And like race and poverty are actually real impediments, but what's amazing is that I don't live in the same America that my father, who's 83, lived in when he was growing up in segregated Texas. And that I see actually like my very existence is like in some ways a testament, and certainly my kids' existence for me represent the idea that like transcendence of this kind of tribal hatred can happen and does happen.
I mean, we have to have you on again because I really wanted to also talk about, we don't have time obviously, but I thought your piece on the lockdowns were really good.
I ripped you off to do, we did a segment on, was it Robin DiAngelo or Richard Spencer who said X? And that we ripped that off from one of your articles actually, or I did anyway. So, but thanks so much for coming on. I'm sorry to keep you on so long, but this.
Oh man, it was my pleasure. Like, I love talking to y'all, love listening to y'all. I love what you're doing, and it's an honor to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Terrific.
Come back on so we can talk about your other stuff and not just this letter.
Pleasure.
All right. Take care. Thanks again.
Bye.
Thank you.